What is up, my fellow gamers? Welcome to the channel. I am the Lethal Shinobi, and today I'd like to showcase to you my build for the Typhon Valour plate. Let's get into it.
The Armor of Chaos was a favorite among Valorians who hunted monsters.
This build guide will be broken down into various different sections, and I'll make them available in the timeline below. I have named this build the Winter Soldier, guys. Overall, the build focuses on crowd control using our shield to blind and chill enemies, making it our primary damage output. Supplementing this playstyle is an additional ailment of your choice, critical hit, and the blessings mechanic. So starting off with the base stats, guys, we want to focus on spirit and vitality if possible. Speccing into spirit is essential as we will be frequently using weapon techniques to apply our secondary ailment of choice. And vitality is important so that we can tackle level 100 enemies in ATOT. Getting into the detail stats, while we go through the key points, please bear in mind, for some of the stats which seem to have low values, it will all make sense once we go through the weapons and equipment. Starting off, we have a 42% average increase to the crit chance and 80% increased damage across both weapons. The increase to crit damage is not really important, it's the critical hit chance that you want to focus on here. For weapon techniques, we have a 68% increase to damage and a 20% to charge speed. I was quite unlucky with some of my rolls on items, try to have these as high as possible. Now moving on to one of the most important parts, we have our shield stats. Here we have a 287% increase to the damage and a 14-second recharge rate. We want our shield available as much as possible, so the lower that you can get the recharge rate, the better this build will be. The second most important stat is our resistances. It is essential to have at least 4 of the resistances at the cap to make this build work. For the bonuses not reflected in the detailed stats screen, 165% increase to ailment duration, and a 227% increase to ailment power. The last stat here to take note of is takedown damage. As our shield will essentially knock down most enemies, we can consistently perform takedowns and clean up any remaining enemies that didn't die from the shield blast. With the base stats done, let's move on to the weapons and equipment, guys. Starting off with the primary weapon here, we are using the Sword of Dominance. The important primary trade required is that we gain the greater blessings of luck whenever we inflict an ailment. If you do not have the Sword of Dominance with this primary trait, you can use the epic item Seethe and enchant it. The greater blessings of luck when gained grants between a 30 to 35% increase to critical hit chance, which is essential for this build. The second requirement for the primary weapon is that it needs to be a different element to water. This will make more sense when we get into the augments. It can be any one that you like, but I would suggest to use fire or void. Fire allows for a high damage output over a short duration, which will allow us to kill enemies quicker when they are slowed and frozen. In the case of Void, I would recommend this as it has the added utility of debuffing the enemy's attack power when curse is inflicted. Other ailments like poison share similar properties to chill's damage over time effect, and although they are viable, they are not efficient. For the secondary weapon, you can choose whichever weapon you like. I'm using the Maul of the Obsidian pack in this example on screen, as I was testing out various different defensive options. From the items I did test, I would recommend using a defensive option such as Isolde's Cobalt Great Maul, or the Last Victory Dual Blades. Both have water DPS and allow us to apply sustained chill on a single target such as bosses. Next up, we have the core pieces of the build. For the charm, we use the legendary item Mithra's Star. The important primary trait here is whenever you perform a critical hit, you gain weapon technique charge and charge speed. If you do not have Mithra's Star with this role, you can use the epic Lion's Talisman and enchant it. Moving on, another core piece is the legendary amulet Kaeta. The reason that we needed the resistances capped is for this item. Each resistance capped will provide an increase to shield charge speed and damage. For the rings, both are mandatory for the build. We have the legendary Eye of the Dragon and an epic item called the Godsmith's Ring. This one on screen that you can see has also been enchanted to be of legendary status. Eye of the Dragon will add to our survivability, as when we defeat an ailment inflicted enemy, you gain overhealth and have increased overhealth retention. The Godsmith's Ring allows us to blind all nearby enemies in a generous radius and really solidifies the crowd control aspect of this build. Lastly, we have the Banner and Lifestone. You can potentially use any item that you like here, but I found the ones most complementary to the build to be the epic banner Mace's Banderole and the legendary Lifestone Archon's Tear. Mace's Banderole has been enchanted also in this example. Both items provide an increase to crit chance and crit damage. With the weapons and equipment covered, let's move on to the augments, guys. First up, for the Winter Soldier build, all of the augments are essential in my opinion and cannot be interchanged. The reason we use Typhon is because the augment constellation allows for both a green vitality cluster and a blue spirit cluster. For the vitality cluster, we use the epic augment Glamour at the center. We gain 100% damage increase for each ailment on the enemy if adjacent augments are green. To activate this augment, we first complement it with the rare augment Rift. This has the same effect as Glamour, and the augment allows us to increase the ailment damage bonus. With these two augments combined, we are granted 144% increase per ailment, and as we use two different ailments in this build, we receive just shy of a 300% increase to our damage output. The second augment that we use in conjunction with Glamour is Presence of Mind. This provides a huge increase to resistances which we need to activate the legendary amulet Kaeta. A quick tip here for you if you are building the Winter Soldier is to start with this augment before the items and equipment. This will allow you to see what resistances you are working with and then add accordingly as you go through the rest of the build. The second cluster of augments we utilize is the Epic Spirit Augment Ardor. This provides a 3% increase to shield damage for every 20 spirit on adjacent augments. We first complement Ardor with the rare augment Black Seed. This will provide a bonus to shield charge speed, and more importantly, the next shield ability will deal more damage. Something to note here guys is that it is any shield ability that will receive the increase in damage, not just the arching shield throw. We'll get into more detail on the shield skills in the skill section of this video. For the second augment used alongside Ardor is the Epic Augment Enchanted Tear. This gives us an increase to our chill duration and does not really affect us negatively as we do not use Archon Fury frequently. This allows for the build to keep true to its crowd control nature and keeps enemies chilled and frozen for the longest time possible. For the last three augment slots, we use the rare augment Scourge. This provides a 6% shield charge whenever we defeat an enemy. Next we have a rare augment Ironheart. This provides an 8% increase to crit chance with a debuff to Rampage. Rampage is not essential to the build and does not majorly affect the build performance. The last augment is a rare augment called Godspeed. This augment provides an increase to weapon technique charge every time we parry an enemy. This augment is vital in this build as when we are dealing with bosses who are aggressive and don't let you in for critical hits, parrying their attacks will still allow us to increase our weapon technique charge speed, which will give us access to our shield. With the augments covered, let's move on to the skill tree guys. Similar to the Divine Curse build for Mobius, I'm going to outline why I have left out certain skills and highlight only the important ones. Any I do not mention are mandatory and you will see me go through the skill tree visually on screen. Firstly, timing attacks and Sundering Slam have no relevance in what the build is trying to do, and Typhon needs an overhaul to the entire system, so these have been left out. Secondly, Breach and Soul Shatter are great mechanics, but do not complement the Winter Soldier build, and the same goes for Archon Fury. Archon Fury is a powerful enough ability without the bonuses. Banners and recovery are not needed as we are focusing on keeping our overhealth up by defeating ailment inflicted enemies, and the points can be used better elsewhere. Polarity attacks only requires 1 point to activate the top right hand side of the skill tree and give us access to Rampage and crit damage. The reason we spec into Rampage is to counteract some of the debuff we receive from the Ironheart augment, and the 30% bonus damage received from Rampage complements the build nicely. One thing to note here guys is that the Resistances skill only requires 4 points spec'd into it. We do not necessarily want to increase the cap. You can choose to spec into this and increase the cap if you push well above the threshold for all the resistances. Weak points only requires 1 skill point as it allows another route to knock down an enemy and hit for additional damage when we successfully parry or evade. It also gives us access to the bottom center of the tree. By far the most important skills here are the 3 associated with the shield. Shield Prime allows us to always be in a prime state and we can manually activate it. This will reflect damage back at the enemies and give a 100% increase to the charge shield throw. For shield attacks, Petrifying Slam and especially Shield Bash allow for great tools in this build. Shield Bash only requires half a shield charge and can instantly interrupt and knock down enemies, making them open for takedown. This also allows us to constantly deny their advances even if a full charge of our arcing shield throw is not available. You can see here I have 1 skill point remaining, and the reason for this is that the last skill on shield attacks is missing. Interrupting red power attacks from enemies is fantastic, however, I personally tend to tap the parry button for incoming attacks and realized I kept wasting my full shield charge, so I removed this. If you could avoid doing this, I would definitely spec into this skill as you can interrupt any enemy. Shield Throw is essential as it provides an increase to the damage and gives us access to 2 additional skills. The one that we'll be utilizing the most is the Arcing Shield Throw, but the Spectral Dash allows us to traverse around the battlefield and get into a group of enemies or out of danger if necessary. Mastering a combination of the shield attacks and throws will make you unstoppable while using this build. With the build complete guys, allow me to summarize and give the Winter Soldier build a final rating. Although the build is geared more towards ATOT runs as the constant influx of enemies allows you to keep the flow going between your shield abilities and weapon techniques, it is equally efficient in Dreamstones and Lightbringer. The build is more than capable of completing all endgame content in solo or multiplayer and has a balanced performance between defensive and offensive play. For solo play, you can achieve floor 30 of ATOT without an issue. For Dreamstones, all level 60 and above enemies are possible. And for Lightbringer, depending on the proficiency with the playstyle, you can seal at least 2 if not all 3 Dark Tears. The core strength of this build comes from its ability to dance around the enemies while they are afflicted by the myriad of status effects. For the weaknesses of the build, guys, there are 2 points I'd like to outline. The first is that the build can be severely weakened by any bane that affects weapon techniques, critical chance or shield abilities. Understanding that critical strikes leads to weapon techniques, which in turn leads to your shield charge, is key here. This is especially prevalent when matchmaking. If your allies pick a bane such as shield throws no longer knock down enemies, or a bane that hinders crit chance such as enemies have a 50% critical hit resistance, will weaken parts of the build to the point where it feels a little clunky. Lastly, for the pinnacle of activities, which will be above floor 28 of ATOT and above level 61 for Dreamstones, you must practice patience when fighting bosses with phases such as Kragani Exalted and armored bosses such as Thrayax. The setup required for bonus damage requires the application of both ailments on an enemy, and aggressive bosses can make this difficult as they require you to act in a small opening window. Armored bosses don't really pose a threat to you, it simply takes slightly longer to break through their defenses and defeat them. Overall, the Winter Soldier build is a very satisfying one to play with in solo or in a group, as you can deny your enemies constantly, whether that's by knocking them down, blinding them, or indeed freezing them in place. I give this build a final Shinobi rating of 8.5 out of 10. The Winter Soldier shines when you are able to constantly control enemies on the battlefield, but has some key breaking points. Now, just before we get into some build variations, guys, I wanted to say if you think you can improve this build in any way, let me know in the comments down below. Also, I have recently created a Discord server and I'm looking to build a community. If you're looking for people to play with, you can find the Discord link in the description down below. So let's get into the variations, guys. For those of you that like the sound of the Winter Soldier but the entire concept has not been sold to you, I have 3 different variations you can use. Note here, guys, a variation means a maximum of 2 changes to items and equipment, and little if not no change to the skill tree. Changing multiple things leads to an entirely different build. First up, for those of you who like the takedown mechanic, we can lean into this. I have named this variation Bloodthirst. To achieve this, we change the weapon to the Sword of Courage and the ring to the Dawnlord Signet. Dawnlord Signet allows us to inflict bleed to surrounding enemies whenever we perform a takedown, and with the Sword of Courage, every time we inflict bleed, we can shoot projectiles dealing damage to surrounding enemies. The explosion allows us to increase the damage of takedown, and bleed ties in nicely with our damage increase from our augments. Bear in mind, guys, this brings its own weakness as you can no longer blind enemies in your proximity and are open to being overwhelmed in the higher floors of ATOT. For the second and last variation I have for you, I have named this one Cold Snap. This is for you guys who like to see slightly higher damage numbers. The ailment consumption mechanic in Godfall is in some ways broken at the moment and will probably be nerfed in the future, but to achieve this, all we need to do is change the Godsmith's ring to the Heavenly Reversal. For you guys that are not aware, the explosive wave shield attack actually counts as a timing attack, and you don't need to use any of the other methods such as heavy attacks to consume ailments, and we do not need to spec into timing attack skills. This brings its own weakness, guys, as your crowd control ability is definitely weakened here, as consuming chill on an enemy will no longer see them frozen or slowed. Alright guys, if you enjoyed the content, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. Let me know if you'd like to see a particular build and I'll try to make it happen. Or indeed, as I've mentioned in my previous video, if you have a build that you would like to share with the community, let me know and I'll try to create a community series to showcase your different builds. Like always, I wish you all a blessed day and I will catch you in the next one.